Good afternoon. This, once again, is Fire Black Press Live. This is our 193rd anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, our convention week. So it's a very important week, but I tell you what, there's no more important person than Jemele Hill to talk about life in general during our convention. Listen, she needs no introduction. So let's just get right to it. Welcome, Jemele Hill.
Well, thank you. It's an honor for me to be here. I'm glad to participate in this convention with you.
Well, we appreciate it. And like I said, number one, we can jump right into it. Sports is coming back. I want to start with sports because, you're a foremost expert on that as well as many other things. So sports is coming back, at least trying to come back. The NBA is in Orlando, Major League Baseball is in their respective cities. And, there's even talk of Mike Tyson fighting Evander Holyfield. So, Jemele, what is your take on this? Is it too soon?
Well, I mean, let's just be realistic about not just sports, but what we're facing as a nation in general. It's too soon for really any of the stuff that we're doing now. And I think that's evidenced by the escalating number of COVID-19 cases that we've seen in pretty much, a huge and significant portion of the country. But I think at this point, that horse has probably left the barn. They're not going to probably shut it down and us try this all over again. We went through that phase, and not surprisingly, it was a little bit premature. In sports, they're trying to figure out the unenviable task of trying to work through a pandemic. And so now sports fans have to suddenly get used to some very uncomfortable realities. Your favorite athletes, you will see, may miss some significant time and be affected by contracting COVID-19. You're going to have leagues that are playing games where there's no fans. I'm very curious as how the NFL believes in a contact sport, they're going to be able to get a handle on this virus. I mean, considering nationally we've had such ineffective and incompetent leadership, I'm not surprised that all the different sports leagues are just kind of on their own. And that's what it feels like, is that everybody's on a bunch of different plans. We don't know what's happening with college football. We saw the Ivy League recently decided that they were going to postpone their season because with college football, either they're all in or nobody's in because of how that can impact scheduling and competing for championships. Yeah. But I get it. I mean, I say all that. I know what the dangers are. We know what time we're living in. But I know that people also are clinging to any reminder of what our lives used to be like when we can just sit down and watch sports and enjoy games and enjoy competition. I just feel like we're kind of caught up in the disaster movie where the scientist with the crazy hair has been telling us a bunch of times what is ahead. And we've all been like, oh, yeah, we get it, but we're not listening anyway. And, I'm a little uncomfortable with the start, but I realize that sports is an entire economy. The NBA is an entire economy that doesn't just involve owners and players, but also people like myself who make a living through sports, the media, many of the people watching. I mean, there's a whole chain of things that are impacted when the games are playing and when they're not. And so, with all that being said, I just think we should all expect some major and significant hiccups as they try to live in a pandemic and be normal when it comes to sports.
Yeah, and Jemele, and sticking with sports, baseball had a heck of a time. The Players Association and the owners. It seems to be the only sport that has this type of labor strife. What's the deal with Major League Baseball?
Well, they also have, the strongest union. So usually what owners or, figureheads or anybody who is in charge of a corporation or big entity like Major League Baseball, they really hate strong union representation because that means that the players are going to fight for everything they believe in. And it's a sport with guaranteed contracts. And so that's the thing, is that when you're asking people to essentially risk their health, you cannot expect these conversations to go smoothly. I mean, people within baseball are divided about the best way to try to do this. The players are divided. The owners maybe not so much, because they're not the ones that have to actually play, and we saw this with the NBA as well, is that you have a lot of players who have opted not to participate in what's happening in Orlando. And I think we're seeing some semblance in that with baseball, like within their own union body. It's kind of hard to force guys to, or force everyone to have a very linear opinion. I mean, it's difficult. And I know to the fans who are watching, as what tends to be the case when it's any labor strife, they automatically side with the owners. And I don't understand that, but they do, because they think the players are just being greedy. And I mean, just kind of looking at what the players' concerns are. And yes, this is going to be about money because of what you're asking them to do. I know people feel like for the greater good of whatever, that they should just say, oh, we'll play as some willing act of charity, but not in a pandemic. That's not how it works. It's just like, no, they cannot just give in to everything that the owners want just because the owners want sports back so that they don't lose as much money. I mean, if we're all being real about the reason sports is coming back, it's because of money. I mean, it's just that simple. And so when that is the basis of why we're choosing to do these things, you're going to get some strife, and you're going to get some disagreement, some strong disagreement. So I wasn't at all surprised by it. The fans' reaction to it was very curious, because they seemed to be thinking the players were being selfish. And I'm like, well, if the players are selfish, what do you call the person trying to get them to go back to work? I don't know.
Well, and with Major League Baseball, the biggest part of the piece of the pie is postseason, and so they stand, and I think that's where really the disagreement probably was the main part of the disagreement, because they stand to make so much money if they make it to the postseason, if the season makes it to the postseason.
And this is, again, one of those things that I wish fans were more empathetic, or at least had more common sense. The owners are asking the players to take a pay cut or to give them some relief. When the owners make more money than anticipated, guess what they don't do? They don't give them extra money because they made it. All right. So it's always fascinating to me that, and we've not just seen this with Major League Baseball, we can apply this with everything else that we've seen happen in big business. When it's you or I, and a tough time comes, a tough economic time comes, the people we have to answer to or work for or whatever, they have no problem telling us, you should have planned better. You should have saved more money. You should have done, they have no problem putting it on most of us.
Right.
But yet when it's big business and they run into a difficult patch, as we all are right now, because it's a pandemic and a lot of things are shut down and people aren't making as much money, they have their hand out and they want help. But when they're making a lot of money, they certainly don't want to give any up. So it's hard for me to have any sympathy for them. And if I'm the players, I'm feeling the same way, is that, again, they're the ones taking the risk, not the guy writing the check. and so I understand why they would fight tooth and nail, even during this time, to get what they deserve.
Yeah. And speaking of contracts, Jemele, Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs just signed the richest deal in team sports history that could pay him more than $500 million. And it's great for him. He's a great athlete. But with 43 million people unemployed, as we just talked about the pandemic and people struggling, particularly small Black businesses having to close up shop, is the announcement somewhat tone deaf?
Well, I will say no, because, the thing is, not announcing it isn't going to make those realities any different for the Black businesses that are facing a difficult time. And, there's an entire cottage industry built around entertainment and sports and athletes like Patrick Mahomes. It may seem that way, and I get why people would feel that way, is that nobody right now, when you have people who are laid off, people who may have been just outright let go, or, as you said, businesses that are struggling, they want to hear about somebody making potentially $500 million. But at the same time, people are allowed to make money. I mean, and Patrick Mahomes, given what he's accomplished at such a early stage in his career, he deserves to be rewarded. What's so interesting, though, about his contract, and even though I know that number 500 sticks out to people, it's not like it's 500 million all fully guaranteed, right?
Right.
There's some things that have to happen for him to collect all of this. But, and I do think this is an interesting point. When you look at how the money breaks down, you kind of wonder if it actually was to his benefit to sign such a lengthy deal. I mean, this is a long time, and value changes all the time in the NFL. And while I don't necessarily fully subscribe to this belief that Patrick Mahomes getting this money means a whole bunch of other quarterbacks are going to get money too, because Patrick Mahomes has been able to separate himself that much from other quarterbacks that this is a deal for him. However, that being said, I mean, we both watch sports long enough to know that there's always somebody coming down the pipeline that you don't expect. And if there's another great phenom that happens, or if, let's say, Lamar Jackson, who is a close comparison when you think about, when you think about what he's accomplished and how young he is. Let's say he takes the Ravens to a Super Bowl, right? And he's still on his rookie deal, and he's just seen Patrick Mahomes get this money. He's won MVP as well. He's got a pretty good case for saying, well, I need as much or I need more, know? And so because it's going to be a little bit of time before Patrick Mahomes can go back to the negotiating table, and he's just getting started, it is possible that he might actually outperform this contract rather quickly.
And to your point, Jemele, that, it's a potential. And in NFL, nothing is guaranteed, right? I think it's 140 million of that is guaranteed. However, people really discount the fact that athletes pay taxes too. In fact, they pay more taxes than we do. And so you figure 140 million guaranteed, perhaps half of that goes to Uncle Sam, as they say. So really, you're looking at 70
I hope he has a
million.
better tax man than that. If Jeff Bezos is out here not paying taxes, I hope Patrick Mahomes has somebody who puts him in a little bit better position.
Listen, I'm from the Marvin Gaye school of believe half of what you see and none of what you hear, right? And with that said, I read something that you said about the Washington football owner Dan Snyder's decision to change the team's name. You said it's not a moral decision, but an economic one. Along with that, the Cleveland baseball team said they're considering a name change. But down in Atlanta, the owners of the baseball team said they will not consider a name change. May we have your thoughts on this situation?
Well, the reason I said that with Dan Snyder, because it wasn't that long ago that Dan Snyder said never, in all caps, would he change the nickname for his football team. Well, never turned out to be maybe not. Maybe I misspoke, because as we all know, once you have sponsors, and especially their key sponsor, threatening, or at least, not necessarily threatening to pull out, but saying, hey, you better change this name if you want our financial cooperation. You have some significant minority owners who are also threatening to pull out. A lot of financial pressure on Daniel Snyder, and that's why it's now under review. So Daniel Snyder is not making this decision because it's the right thing to do. And it's been the right thing to do, by the way, for, a number of years. This should have never been this team's name, honestly. It's just because the economic pressure. And unfortunately, in this country, as much as we sometimes might like to get nostalgic and kind of rewrite history, the majority of progress that we've made in this country has come under threat and duress. It's not because somebody wakes up and all of a sudden, like, what the right thing to do would be. I mean, if you want to go back to freeing the slaves, if you want to go, back even more recently to what engineered the civil rights movement, or us getting civil rights, it was a boycott that economically was going to break Montgomery. That's what it was, Montgomery, Alabama. So it was not that people all of a sudden had a change of heart. And so this is the situation that Daniel Snyder finds himself in, which is he's cornered. And I don't think he has any other choice but to, be able to change this name. And Cleveland, smartly, they've been trending in this direction anyway. They retired Chief Wahoo. I think before it gets to that, they want to be ahead of it. And so that's why they're doing it. And the only reason Atlanta hasn't come along is because there hasn't been enough financial pressure on them to do so. But trust me, for as ever they want to be dug in today, they will not be as dug in if the money starts to flow in a different direction.
Absolutely. We are talking with the fabulous Jemele Hill. This is Black Press Live. This week is the 193rd anniversary of the Black Press of America. And the 80th year. I was going to say 50. I was way off. The 80th year of the NNPA. Our conference is going on now as we speak. We are so pleased to have Jemele Hill tonight at 7 o'clock. The conference actually closes on a high note. It's our awards night. And tonight, Ice Cube is getting the Artist of the Century Award. Ziggy Marley is getting a Global Icon Award. The great Mary Wilson from the Supremes is being given a Trailblazer Award, actually. And there's going to be some special performances from Mary Wilson and from the Temptations. And wait till you see it. I was privy to them planning for this. So you're going to be blown away. Jemele, Nicole McDaniel is watching, and she says that she wanted you to know that she is really enjoying your Down in the Hole podcast about The Wire.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I appreciate it. And I guess for those who are not as familiar, I have two podcasts. I have my own called Jemele Hill is Unbothered. And I also do another podcast. It's a rewatch pod with my co-host, Van Lathan. And what we do is we break down every single episode of The Wire. And right now we're in season 2, deep into season 2. And so, we break down every single episode, talk about, what happened, larger societal meanings. And I will say, not that I'm surprised necessarily, but The Wire, for what's happening today, has held up exceptionally well. So if you haven't watched The Wire in a long time, rewatch it. If you never watched The Wire, you definitely need to watch The Wire. It's the greatest television drama of all time.
Well, speaking of The Wire, Jemele, and maybe I have to listen to the podcast. And when you get to this, if you haven't gotten to this in the podcast yet, I'm so upset still after all these years that Idris Elba's character got killed away. I thought he was going to get away.
No, he needed to be killed. Trust me. So I don't know how many times you've gone through The Wire. So I used to be in the Stringer Bell fan club. Personally, I think I may have been blinded by his looks. What can I say, right? So, the first time I watched The Wire, I, like you, felt a little bad about the fact that Stringer met his end. And sorry for the spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but it was on 20 years ago. So I think we're safe. So, but when you rewatch, you realize, as I did, and I did not come to this on my own, I begrudgingly came over to this side of things because a former colleague and friend of mine, Bomani Jones, is at ESPN. He got me to see the light because he was always talking about how awful Stringer was. And when I rewatched it, I had to be honest. He was right. Stringer does a series of truly despicable things that the way it ended for him was completely justified. So rewatch it again. Look, Stacey, your mind might be changed.
Okay, so is that what happened? You had to rewatch it to really appreciate him getting killed?
Yeah, because I think the first time that I watched it, it was such a new series, and this is what makes The Wire stand out from other ones. Most series are told in a very easily digestible, typical television format. The Wire was truly a novel. So you often hear people who say they love season 1 but hated season 2, right? Season 2 when all the white people came in, and people were so upset about that. But you have to see it as a novel where they're brick by brick explaining to you the story of America, but the story of urban America and the story of Baltimore. And when you see it if you see it as more of an accordion, as opposed to just like, oh, this season, that season, see it all together, you get a much different understanding and you realize the brilliance of it. Because, David Simon, they're talking about things then, the season 2 was in part about sex trafficking. Sex trafficking, nobody was talking about that then, not in 2002. Nobody was. And even though we knew in the early 2000s about police brutality and some of the corruption in the police department, he exposes all of this about how it's about individual police officers who certainly have made some awful and horrible choices and deserve to be held accountable. But it's about an entire system that just encourages their corruption, incompetence, and all the things that we're seeing today, that it's built and designed that way. So The Wire was truly ahead of its time.
Well, I will say this. If there's a such thing as dying with dignity or dying the right way or whatever, Stringer Bell stood there and said, "You know what? Get on with it." So I do remember
He had it
that.
coming.
He had it
Yeah.
coming. So a major. Oh gosh, I'm messing with my earbuds here. A major
Mhm.
congratulations is in order to you. I mean, you've accomplished so much already. I remember reading your bio that you wrote saying that you almost, I guess you almost chose something else as a career back in high school. And thank God you said something about thankfully you chose journalism, and we are all thankful for that. But congratulations, you just signed to do, I understand, Colin Kaepernick's docuseries for
Yeah.
Disney.
So Colin Kaepernick signed an overall production deal with Disney and ESPN, and in addition to working with the Undefeated and collaborating with them for content and supplying them with content, he's also ESPN is also going to produce his docu series, much in the same vein as we saw recently with Michael Jordan in The Last Dance, or with O.J. Simpson, Made in America. So it's
Mhm.
going to be a really big deal, and I am very grateful, honored, humbled, whatever other word fits, to be a part of this. Colin asked me to be a producer on the docu series, and this is really, to me, when it's all said and done, I mean, this may be the benchmark of my whole career, is being able to do something like this because of how important his story has become, and especially now when there's so many people who somehow are looking back and said, he had a point, really. I mean, as if we did not know all of this in 2016. So yeah, I mean, this is going to be a special moment, for me to be able to be a part of this. And as journalists, and this is one of the reasons I got into this business, is that we are the chroniclers of history. That is
Yep.
what we do. We put things into context, and whenever dealing with things that I write or columns and I think about it this way: is that if somebody reads this 20 years from now or 10 years from now, what will they know about the context of the moment? And so, given all the false narratives around Colin's story, this is an opportunity on the record to get it right. And
Yeah.
so, I think this is going to be huge. I'm very much looking forward to it. And there's a lot about Colin that people still don't know, outside of him just being the person who protested in 2016 and had his career taken away from him as a result. There's a lot in between that. And so I can't wait to, for people to see like the full story. And I'm just honored to play any role in telling of this tremendous story whatsoever.
Well, most of us can't wait. So, and speaking of that, Jemele, Commissioner Goodell, Roger Goodell, NFL, has come out in the wake of the George Floyd murder and protest to say that they were wrong about Colin Kaepernick. What was your reaction? I guess I got it. What was your reaction when you heard the commissioner say that?
Well, I just couldn't help but honestly laugh, and because look, the fact of the matter is that police brutality didn't start with George Floyd. It's an awful death, and I think it registered much differently for a lot of people. But this has been an issue that has been a consistent cancer in our community for years, for literally ever. I mean, we can go back to Rodney King in 1992. Like nothing has changed, all right? And so I think the only thing that changed was public opinion now seems to be swayed toward people universally realizing that this is a significant issue. State-sanctioned violence against Black people and Black bodies is a problem. And that's really it. And I guess it's disappointing because, as we know, as history has shown us so many times, is that you only really get one opportunity to be on the right side of history. I mean, you could join in later, don't get me wrong, but there's going to come that moment, that fork, where when it's not popular, when it's not convenient, when you don't have public opinion on your side, you're going to have an opportunity to really show what it is that's in you, show what you're about. And the NFL did that in 2016 and 2017 when they not only didn't support Colin Kaepernick and the other players who were protesting, but they backed down to the president when he got on his bullhorn. And so they've already exposed what they're really about. And frankly, I don't know if they can ever atone for that. I mean, Colin Kaepernick being back in the NFL would be a huge step. That's for one. But they can't atone for the fact that they already failed the mission. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I think, when Roger Goodell talked about how they get it now and it's important and Black Lives Matter, I just think back to when I read a bunch of polls when Martin Luther King Jr. was in the media spotlight when he was pushing for equality and civil rights. And the majority of people in this country thought that he was harmful to civil rights. Majority of the people in the country hated him and thought that he was sending their progress back. There was a huge collection of people who thought he was actually a communist. So all of that was their opportunity to be on the right side of history. And then, of course, we know he was murdered. And so now when people, especially my favorite is how every year the CIA and the FBI wish Martin Luther King Jr. a happy birthday, which I think is hilarious. And the most sad and reprehensible and despicable of ways, because they had as much to do with his death as anybody did, if you know history. And so I find this convenient rewriting of history to be frustrating. And so the NFL, congratulations for joining the right side of history, I guess. But when you think about the fact that despite, all the different, there's been players in the league who have, hit women, who have killed people, who have done a lot of really awful things. And the one person they choose to blackball that they decide they cannot have in their league is somebody who simply said, please stop murdering Black people. That's the guy. So it's just hard to take anything that Roger Goodell or frankly any of the NFL owners say with any degree of sincerity or genuineness.
Yeah. Athletes, well, let me say this. Michael Jordan, if there was one criticism of Michael Jordan in his career and following his great career, was that he never really spoke up. He never really stood up. And we saw what Colin Kaepernick did. But I think what's overlooked by many is that the WNBA has players who have always stood up. And I'm sure you are very much aware of that. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So for people who may not realize this, so before Colin Kaepernick took a knee in 2016 in the preseason, before Colin Kaepernick took his knee, the Minnesota Lynx, they spoke up about what happened to Philando Castile. They wore T-shirts. They talked about it in their press conference, and they even went so far as to that they were not accepting any questions unless it was about what happened to Philando Castile and police brutality. And as a team, they came together and made a strong statement about how they felt. And the reaction by the Minnesota Police Department, the Minneapolis Police Department, same police department, by the way, that was killed George Floyd, was that they walked off their post. Because as some of you may or may not know this, but at a lot of sporting events, officers, they are the security. And many of them do it for extra money. It's like a really nice additional income boost for the Minneapolis, or for most police departments, I should say. And they drew the scorn of the police union. They were castigated by what they did. And these are women who don't have millions of dollars to lose, who, if they did lose an endorsement, it's going to have a significant impact on their financial stability. If they're not able to play, if they have a lot riding on them playing professionally, they don't have any room for error. And yet we have seen not just the Lynx, but so many women in the WNBA stand tall and vehemently and about what they believe. Maya Moore, who, when you look at her resume, a case can be made that she's the most accomplished basketball player, definitely in women's history, definitely in women's basketball history, but she's right in that pantheon of most accomplished basketball players, period. I think it's all but 2 continents she hasn't won a championship. She won 2 NCAA titles. She's a finals MVP. She's won multiple titles in the WNBA. During the pinnacle and peak of her career, she walked away from the game to help free a young man, Jonathan Irons, who was in jail, had been in jail since he was a teenager, overly punished, overcharged, and he just recently was freed from prison because Maya poured all of her energy into getting this young man out of jail. And she's also been very vocal about, what she wants to do on the criminal justice front. She's written letters to prosecutors, not just involving in her case, but just in general. Like, she's really stepped up, and this is really a passion project of hers. So she has done that. Many of the women in the league have participated in the protest. Several players have opted out this season because they want to pour all their energy into fighting social justice issues. I mean, these are women, Black women, I should be very intentional about saying that, who are used to having to fight for their respect and their dignity all the way through their careers. So this is as natural to them as breathing, dropping what they're doing to fight for bigger issues and being vocal about what they're fighting for. So they have always done it. And so they've been at the forefront of a lot of what we're seeing now.
Yeah, and the think about it, WNBA, those players, they don't get paid nearly what the guys get paid.
No, so they have a lot more to lose.
And yes, absolutely. And quickly, Jemele, I know you got to run shortly. So much is said about the need for meaningful change, right? We see these companies, Hulu, Amazon, you name it, right? They're doing the Black Lives Matter, advertisements and spending money, they're making their marketing campaigns behind it now. What would you say is really needed to make meaningful change?
Well, what's needed to make meaningful change is, I think these companies need to be brutally honest about why the culture they have exists. If you're looking around your boardroom and you still don't have any people of color, you still don't have adequate Black representation, you still haven't empowered the Black people that are in your company, then you need to question how serious you actually are about Black Lives Mattering. Many of them that put out these statements, what their boardrooms look like is abysmal. It is what it is. And so while a number of companies have made certain gestures to try to show that they're with the cause and that they're, trying to change, much like with the NFL we were talking about a moment ago, I don't care that you sing the Black National Anthem before the games in week 1. I want people to understand I care about the Black National Anthem and I love it, but I don't care that they do it. What I want to know is why you only have 3 Black head coaches in the NFL, why there's only 2 Black GMs, why you've never had a majority Black owner. That's what I need you to address. And it was the same when I think that National Realtor Association put out this statement about how they were no longer going to use the term master bedroom. They were going to say primary bedroom. That's great. But you know what I need you to address? Why even now in 2020 that Black people in housing are still getting discriminated against? Why realtors only show them certain neighborhoods and keep them away from others? Why they don't tell them about, lending programs that could financially benefit them, but they tell white customers about all the different ways that they can, appeal to lenders and are more helpful. I need you to do that. And so until they address structure and structural racism and institutional racism, these gestures don't really mean much. So, what I want to know is more about what you're doing inside your building to empower, amplify, and elevate the Black people that are there. And until you have that answer, you can keep these gestures, because what matters is changing the culture and the structure.
The great Jemele Hill. You mentioned real quick, and we'll let you go. You mentioned about the benchmark of your career earlier, but isn't being on this program sort of a benchmark for you?
You're right. I need to correct myself, Stacey. Look, you see that Emmy back there? That means nothing. That means nothing.
That's a mic drop right there.
This is the benchmark. This is the pinnacle. And if I must say, I think I'd be remiss rather in not saying is that what the Black press has meant to the Black community, you can't really, there are no words. It's this invaluable resource, much like a lot of things when it comes to our community. Long before it became fashionable to do it, long before mainstream ever cared about us, the Black press was there telling our stories, reporting on our neighborhoods, reporting on what mattered to us. And I think especially now that there needs to be, with the numbers of Black journalists, period, continuing to dwindle, there needs to be a re-emphasis on supporting the Black press. And so I will do whatever I need to do that, because it's still a critical element and role in our society, particularly as we remain undercovered, underreported, and often not contextualized properly.
Well, Jemele Hill, you are certainly looked up to by many of us. You keep doing what you're doing. We're going to keep cheering from the sidelines for you. Um, my news director sent me a question, and you probably can see it. He says, "Let Jemele know about some of the recent performances. We've had Carlos Santana,
Oh,
Denise Williams. We just had Salt from Salt and Pepper on. Anthony
what?
Hamilton, Ziggy Marley. So he says that they all have sang us a little song. In fact, Sean Stockman went off today. He blew it out the water today for us. So
Okay,
he said,
now I'm
ask
getting.
her, ask her if she would care to sing a few bars to keep up our string of musical performances.
Okay, I'm not gonna sing. I will rap instead. And since you
There you go.
had one of certainly growing up, Salt and Pepper was one of my favorite groups. So I'll give you a little "I'll Take Your Man," because that used to be my song growing up. I'll take your man right out the box and put him under my padlock. And when you see us together chilling in the place, cold robbing and stomping right in your face. Go ahead, roll your eyes, suck your teeth, keep humping and pumping like a dog in heat. That used to be my song, man. I love Salt Pepper.
You go. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Black Press Live. This is our fire broadcast. And tonight, again, our convention concludes, our annual convention concludes, the 193rd year of the Black Press. At 7 o'clock, you can go to www.virtualnnpa2020.com. A great show is planned tonight. A special performance from the Temptations, Mary Wilson from the Supremes. Ice Cube is in the house getting a major award. Check it out, Ziggy Marley. Jemele Hill, you are fantastic. Thank you. Stay safe, stay well. Keep doing what you're doing. Everybody, have a great night.
All right, take care, guys.